All right, all. So I remember in the last video when I was talking about mask, I was kind of relating it to Photoshop, and I was kind of discussing how Photoshop has a vector mask, which is what this is. This is a vector shape built with a vector tool like the pen tool, but you also had the ability to use raster graphics. In other words, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but I'm using raster tools like the brush tool and there's other tools I could use to add or subtract from the mask. Okay. So one uses raster, one uses vector. By definition, when we use a mask in Adobe After Effects, it is vector based. Okay. But there is ways of using raster graphics to hide or crop or to choose what is being visible and what is invisible. Okay. So I have this picture of a hawk. Okay. And the hawk is a PNG file. And before we do anything, I just want to kind of show it to you so we kind of get an idea of what's happening. So where is the hawk? Sorry, here it is. I'm going to open this into Photoshop. You could also open this into Photopea. And notice how the background is invisible, right? So really the content here is not this rectangle, but just this part. And I'm going to go back to After Effects, and I'm going to place the picture of the hawk on top. And actually, we're going to look at something called the alpha. The alpha, when we talk about alpha, alpha represents where there is content and where there's transparency. And the way you can actually see this in your composition window is down here. You might see this thing that kind of looks like three colors, red, green, and blue. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go to where it says alpha. And see where it's showing me black and white. Well, the black is invisible and the white is visible. Okay. Or the black is where there's not alpha and the white is where there's alpha. What I'm going to do is use the alpha of this image to affect the video below it. Okay. And the way we're going to do this is something called a track matte. What a track matte does is it uses data of the image that's above it to affect what is visible and what is not visible. So we're going to select track matte and we're going to set this to alpha or matte alpha hawk. Okay. And when I do this, you can see that the alpha from the hawk is now acting as basically a mask for the rest of my video. Just to kind of, I'm going to undo this just to kind of say no matte. I'm going to drag in this other photo of a giraffe. Once again, this giraffe is an image. If I take it into Photoshop, it's got a transparent background. And I can use that alpha to affect my video. So once again, I'm going to go under Track Matte and let's set that to Matte Alpha Giraffe. And now my video is playing through that picture of the giraffe. So you can see in this case, these pictures of the hawk and the alpha, they are not vector based, they're raster based, but I can still use it to affect how this is being affecting my video here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about a different type of matte called a luma matte. Okay. Luma is short for luminosity, how bright or dark something is. So in this case, white is visible, black is invisible, and then gray is like semi-transparent. And what we're going to do is I have this Luma matte that I made in Photoshop. And I got this video. And what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to use the track matte, and I'm going to click on it and choose matte luminosity splatter. And it doesn't look like anything happened because it's actually using the alpha by default, and the alpha of this image is actually the whole image. It's a whole rectangle, which is why we're seeing all of this. But what I'm going to do is click this again. And when I do that, it actually switches to a luma map, which means it's not using the alpha of the layer above it, but instead the luminance values. Okay, and remember, when we do that, white is visible, black is invisible, and then gray is like kind of semi-transparent. And the result is something that kind of looks like this. Okay, let's try this again. Let's use a different, so here I have this picture of trees that I made. Once again, it's like there are bright parts, there are dark parts, and there's kind of gray parts here. I'm going to take this video and we're going to set this to the luminance of this layer. Now, once again, it may default to alpha, so you might want to double click so this turns to sunshine. That little sunshine means it's a luma matte. And you can see now that instead of having the video go through, now it's going through the trees here and you're getting kind of this interesting effect. If you want to do the opposite of your Luma mat, you can actually do this, and so it kind of inverts it for you automatically, which is kind of nice. If you want to, you could actually make your own Luma mat. So I'm just going to make one real quick in Photoshop. So I'm just going to, oops. So it's all based on black and white. So if I were to do something like this, remember black is invisible, white is visible. And I'm going to save this as a make actually it doesn't matter if I save it as a JPEG. I'm going to save it to today's files. Let's save it as a JPEG and let's save it as a Luma personal. Oops, where did I'm going to go into here. All right, I'm going to go back and let's import that Luma mat I just made by going to File, Import File. Oop, whoa, what happened there? Import file. There we go. I'm not quite sure what happened there. All right, let's put this in our composition. I'm just going to scale it a little bit. All right, and then let's set it to this, and then this is the part that were white, so it's the part that is kept. Parts that were black were the parts that were not kept. So you can make your own Luma mats very simply in something like Photoshop or Photopea or something like that, just by using the drawing tools if you're, familiar with the basics of how to use the drawing tools there. All right, let's talk about nesting compositions. Okay. Oops, I think I might have jumped forward. Did I jump forward? No, I didn't actually. All right. Actually, I think I did. I have this misnumbered. I'll fix it before I give it to you guys. Let's do this one. In this one, I have a bunch of images here. And so if I were to look at this, I'm going to put this here. I could use like a Luma mat. Like let's say I wanted to do this. So this is using the giraffe, but the other ones are still their normal ones because, when you apply a Luma mat or an alpha mat, it can only use one of the images, right? I can't use all of them. So what if I wanted to use all four of these? Now I could take them to something like Photoshop and like maybe make it all into one image, but there's actually this thing called preserving underlying transparency. And so what I can actually do here, I'm going to set this to
Honestly, one thing that's been a big part of my life.
whoops, here I'm gonna place this image actually at the top. And I'm going to place, if I were to use what's going to happen is this is going to use the images below it, its alpha, as something like this. So you can see how this is affecting it. I'm going to turn this off and turn this off. Let's say I were to come in here and add, I'm just going to draw a vector shape, or maybe even add like maybe another boat shape here, just to give it sort of a unique shape. Once again, now that I've added more shapes, it's still going to use all the alpha of these layers. And so if I click on preserve transparency, oops, of the flower, it's going to use all of those when it's moving its, its style around there. Okay. You could probably think of some more fun ways of doing this where maybe I'm going to import like a video. Let's use that coffee video that I downloaded for today's session. And let's say I'm going to apply that. So I have some interesting things here. And I could still animate these. So for instance, maybe I'm going to change the position of the boat. And by doing that, that's going to affect how, the shape is, how the video is preserving throughout the whole shape. All right, so you can see how you could kind of play around with these ideas, using masks, using alpha mats, luma mats to kind of give you this kind of unique kind of situation you might want to do. Uh, yeah, okay. Last thing I want to talk about is compositions. So at the moment, what we've been doing is working with one composition. So, I've played around with videos and, you know, I have 3 videos of a puppy here. And what I actually want to do is apply an effect. So what I could do, we've talked about, okay, I could take this and apply, maybe a color correction tint and make it black and white. And then I'd have to copy and paste that to all these others. But there's another way to deal with this, which is you can actually place a composition inside of another composition. This is called nesting, okay? So I have this composition I built called Puppies, and it's 640 by 480. And I also have this other one called Main, which is also 640 by 480, which is currently empty. So notice how the puppy one has 3 layers and this one only has 0. What I can actually do is take this and drag it into here. And when I do that, what it's going to do is compress this. And so you'll notice that I'm getting exactly the same contents as this one. The difference being it's coming through as one layer as opposed to multiple layers. Now, this can make it much easier to deal with. For instance, what if I wanted to apply maybe some sort of effect, like a color correction tint? I'm really only having to apply it once because it's applying to one layer as opposed to applying to multiple layers like it was doing before. Another thing would also be like if I wanted to move all these together, we've talked about parenting, which would work, but an easier way to do this might be, okay, well, since this is now considered one layer, if I were to animate this, it animates all of the content of that composition as one thing. What's nice is at any time you can always go back and you can update this composition. And by updating this composition, it'll automatically update the other composition. Okay. So a lot of times people might do nesting to make it easier to sort of organize parts, so you don't get like compositions that have like 1,000 layers in them or anything like that. It may just make it easier to work with. Okay. All right. So here I have a bunch of vector circles that are kind of just starting in the center and they're moving along. Now, if I wanted all of these to move up, I could do this with parenting. I could make like a parent layer and, try to do that. So what I'm trying to do here is like, okay, these are kind of, this is acting as, I'm just kind of animating it here. But then what I might do is take this, pull it into, I'm nesting this into this other one. And while that's happening, maybe I'm going to just animate its position. All right, so I'm going to have this move upward. So while the other video is having it do this, see how it's like this is moving up while those are expanding? Maybe that's a little too fast. Maybe I'll slow that down a little bit. Maybe I'll even play around with transparency so I could sit around and have this be 0 and then animate inward. So you can see how, not that this was impossible, but see how like this kind of became easier to deal with. And then later on, if I want to change these, I can edit these and that would update within here. So for instance, I don't know, maybe some of these are gonna go in a different direction. When I do that, this all kind of updates like that, you know? All right, I'd like you guys to try that out. That was bibbidi bobbidi boom, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, please. Okay.